I unexpectedly got pregnant with a baby from my arch-enemy's family. I had a moment of weakness and decided to keep the child. At the baby shower, guests were whispering, "The little girl's green eyes look a bit like Peter's." I felt a wave of panic and blurted out, "Her dad is mixed." But then, her dad happened to be at the party, staring dangerously at his baby and me. "It's my daughter's 1-month celebration today." More than half of the city's elite showed up at Linda's house to celebrate. I stood in the bedroom, gazing at my daughter, feeling incredibly soft inside. Her pink cheeks and fair skin looked just like mine. Unfortunately, she got her dad's green eyes. Luckily, being a newborn, she mostly sleeps and doesn't open her eyes often. I made sure she was asleep before carrying her downstairs with a smile. As soon as I walked down, the guests turned their eyes on me. Some who were close with Linda's family approached and stared intently at my baby. "Look at those thick brows and big eyes, the nose and mouth, she's just like Linda. She sure took the good features of Linda's family." Born with Linda family's pride, George finally has an heir. My grandpa was quite proud. Of course, she's my granddaughter's kid, how could she not be outstanding? Unlike Peter's family, no kids pass down even till this generation. Serves them right to have few heirs. Hearing Peter's family being mentioned, I hugged my baby tighter, worried. "Grandpa, you're talking about your own great-granddaughter's father." "But I can't let Grandpa know about this. After all, Linda's family and Peter's family are arch-enemies. Technically, my daughter is the only bloodline left in this generation from the Peter family. The last of the line. The grudge between our families stemmed from great-grandfather's era and continues to this day. They're like water and fire. If Grandpa finds out my child is from Peter's family, what will happen?" To avoid suspicion, I quickly changed the subject. "Grandpa, little ones have weak immune systems, I'll take her back to the room to rest. The longer she's out here, the higher the risk of being exposed. I can't predict how Grandpa will handle this if he discovers the truth." My mouth really got ahead of me. I said it would be okay, when a piercing cry echoed. The baby woke up. I'm so unlucky, what a poor timing. I fumbled to comfort her, but the more I tried, the louder she cried, until everyone at the party could hear. Things got out of control. At the worst time, murmurs spread through the crowd. "The baby's got green eyes." Wow, really? Am I seeing things? Those green eyes do look a bit like Peter's. Voices of curiosity surfaced among the crowd. Even Grandpa seemed puzzled. I panicked. Grandpa hadn't seen my daughter open her eyes before, so he didn't know she had green eyes. I nervously covered her eyes and, without thinking, lied, "Her dad is mixed." Thankfully, I was quick on my feet. If they found out I had my rival's kid, my great-grandfather could roll in his grave. I'd be doomed. "Linda, you're something. When did your taste change? Why didn't I know?" Just as I was secretly relieved, a voice chimed in, sounding quite resentful. My heart skipped a beat. I took a few steps back, feeling guilty. "Peter? What's he doing here? He can't know the kid is his, right?" "No way," I slipped away quietly that night. "He shouldn't have figured it out." The crowd parted suddenly, and there stood Peter, emitting a dangerous aura, glaring at me and the baby I held. Those cold green eyes matched my daughter's exactly. I gulped, frozen in place. Fleetingly, I recalled that night a year ago. He was just as dangerously sharp then. However, he eventually let me have my way with him. He wasn't like this back then. While I was lost in thought, Peter was already in front of me. Dressed in black, emotionless as ever. His sharp eyes were downcast, fixated on the baby. Being watched like this, I was a bundle of nerves. What to do? The baby's dad just showed up at the door. Thankfully, Grandpa stood between us, knocking his cane forcefully and speaking with discontent. "Peter, what are you doing here? This is not an invite for you." Grandpa completely inherited great-grandfather's disdain toward Peter's family, always showing a cold front. Seizing the moment, I hurried upstairs, feeling guilty. But Peter was faster. He blocked my path with a colder demeanor. "Linda, the baby's dad?" Before he could finish, my daughter cried out even louder than before. Ignoring the talk, I rushed to soothe her. For some reason, she kept crying and even struggled more. Until a voice came from above, "Let me hold her." It was Peter. Somehow, the moment Peter took her, she stopped crying. Even blinked at him with those same green eyes curiously. Me, oh no. The baby likes her dad. Peter stood motionless holding Coco, terrifyingly silent. The vibe shifted to something unsettling. Sensing unease, I was about to take my daughter back when Peter stepped back. He squinted, his focus on the baby's eyes, then lifted his gaze slowly. In a sharp, deliberate tone, he asked, "Linda, who did you say the baby's father was?" I felt a chill run down my spine. I nervously avoided his curious gaze. Couldn't help but mumble in my heart. Could his vision be that sharp, spotting Coco as his daughter at first glance? That's not how it goes in novels. Usually, the heroine runs away, and even when the kid is 4 or 5, the hero doesn't recognize them at once. How did he know just by looking once? With eyesight that good, he was rolling in the hay with me the other night. If it weren't for our families being sworn enemies, you'd think he had a crush on me. "Peter, what are you doing here? This is my daughter's full-month banquet. Give Coco back to me quickly." I reached out to take my daughter back, but Peter raised an eyebrow and suddenly leaned in to look me in the eye. We were so close. I could even smell the cool cedar scent on him. Just like that night, when he surrounded me from behind, engulfing me, and slowly caressing and lingering on my nape. My tailbone tingled uncontrollably. I choked up. "Linda, get a grip. Is this really the time to be thinking about that?" Coco is still in Peter's hands. Peter's expression became even more enigmatic, making me anxious. Surprisingly, though, he actually handed my daughter back to me and whispered something only we could hear. "Linda, the baby is mine, right? That night, I knew it was you." The whole thing with Peter was just an accident. Even though Linda's family and Peter's family are bitter rivals, he and I grew up together thanks to our victory-hungry elders. They just had to outdo each other through us. So every meeting turned into a competition by our families. Peter's parents were okay, not too hostile toward Linda's family. But my grandfather and Peter's grandfather? They couldn't stand each other from the get-go, thanks to some old family feud. That bad blood trickled down, and Peter and I drifted apart. The accident happened after a night of drinking. Everyone in City A knew about the tension between Linda and Peter's families, so we were rarely seated at the same table during events. But that night, things just went awry. The host totally set us up together, probably thinking it would stir some drama. At the table, we ignored each other. Even when toasting, it was more like a challenge. So we ended up drinking glass after glass against each other. Then somehow, we ended up entangled together. When I woke up the next day, my whole body ached. Glancing sideways in bed, there was Peter, silent, with his eyes shut and his hands still possessively around my waist. My brain stalled for a few seconds. Closing my eyes and then opening them again, I entertained every possibility except the fact that I had actually slept with my nemesis. How did last night even happen? Try as I might, I couldn't make any sense of it, so I just put my focus back on Peter. Swallowed hard, and with a moment of insanity, I reached out to feel his abs. They felt incredible. Who would have thought that behind Peter's thin and aloof exterior, he was actually packing some heat? Sadly, he's the enemy, so I snuck away and erased all traces of that night. Yet somehow, he remembered and even knew it was me that night. What are you even saying, Peter? I don't understand you. I took a few steps back, pretended not to get it, and went upstairs. He just called out after me, almost creepily, not admitting it. No biggie, I can play the stepdad. The next day, it blew up online. The tag held its top spot on trending, outshining all other hot topics. Commenters online were going wild, guessing at Peter's motives. Linda. George suddenly called out my name. I instinctively straightened up. Yes? Tell me, who's Coco's real dad? Who else could it be if not Peter? But of course, I wouldn't say that out loud. I kept silent, like a little quail, bowing my head lower. Seeing my demeanor, George got so mad that he thumped his cane a few times. He was unhappy when he noticed the door. John, what's your business here? I'm here to offer congratulations, what else? Peter's grandpa adjusted his mustache nervously, his eyes darting around as he spoke. Peter's grandpa seemed eager, and it baffled me. Stepdad? Didn't Peter tell John the truth? I sneaked a peek at Peter, who was also looking at me. When our eyes met, I felt my breath catch, almost buckling under that unguarded gaze. George was shocked by John's words. He blurted out, "Are you out of your mind?" John seemed genuinely astounded, while George's suspicious gaze shifted to Peter. Why is your family so keen on being a dad? Is John really so magnanimous? My luck was thoroughly out. Peter smiled gently. George, my grandpa can't wait for me to be Coco's dad. Right? Grandpa? No sooner had Peter said that than John surged forward eagerly, grabbing George's hand. George, if you'll just let me see little Coco, never mind being a stepdad, even if you want Peter to marry into your family, I'm game. I was completely dumbfounded. It wasn't until I saw Coco in John's arms that I understood. Looking at the big and small, the old and young, with their identical green eyes. George finally realized the truth, gritting his teeth at me. Didn't you say Coco's father was a mixed breed? Seeing George that angry, I softly defended myself. Isn't Peter technically a mixed breed? I didn't lie. George was left speechless, choking from frustration, and just rapped his cane non-stop. Someday, your great-grandfather will be so furious with you he'll claw his way out of his coffin. Seeing the actual situation, George glared at John even more. Especially as John was happily holding Coco, bursting with glee. My dearest Coco, you're adorable, John beamed. John, she's my great-granddaughter. George spoke again, denial clear. Still my great-granddaughter, John countered joyfully. What do you mean yours? Coco's my blood too. While George and John were busy quarreling, Peter whisked me away to the room next door. Closing the door behind us, he pinned me against it. Eyes shadowed yet intent. Linda, why did you block me? He asked. I've been trying to reach you. He tugged on my hand, pulling me in closer once again. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. No need for that, really. Peter didn't say a word, just looked at me with a bit of indifference. I felt deflated, like a balloon losing air, and let him take control. You touched me all over, and it still wasn't enough for you. You even bit my Adam's apple. I can still remember that moment. Now that I'm yours, you better take responsibility. With that, Peter withdrew his hand, calmly fixing the torn fabric on his chest. And besides, you ran off carrying my child. Mentioning this seemed to rile Peter up a bit. His tone had a tinge of anger. You blocked me, abandoned me, even hid the fact there was a child. When I found out she was back and the first thing she did was throw a 1-month banquet for the baby, I was furious. I even thought about becoming a stepdad to her kid. The more Peter spoke, the more guilty I felt. But it's not like I had control over it. Our families were sworn enemies. If George found out I was carrying the rival family's kid, he'd skin me alive. And didn't you hate me, too? I always thought Peter disliked me since high school. I first met Peter when I was 5. George took me to a party, and we ran into David and Peter. The two old men locked eyes and immediately started bashing each other in front of us. They even argued over whether Peter or I was better. I hadn't met Peter before, but George talked about him so much, it was impossible not to remember. So I sneaked a peek at Peter from behind George. He was a few months older than me, standing there quietly while the old men argued, showing no reaction. Then he saw me peeking and our eyes met for a long time. When the old guys weren't looking, he grabbed my hand and we slipped away. We made it to a pool in the ballroom. Once we were sure no one was following, he sighed in relief and we sat down. Phew, we finally escaped. You're Linda, right? With a serious face, he turned his head to look at me. I was surprised he knew my name but nodded anyway. George always talks about you. So that's what you look like. He seemed curious about me, giving me glances over and over. David mentions you too. He says you're smart, the best of your generation. Peter was really good looking, fair-skinned and soft. Made me want to pinch him, but I didn't dare. I just sat quietly. We never expected our grandpas were like that. I heard from George that our families were sworn enemies. What does that mean, being sworn enemies? I had no clue back then, so Peter kindly explained. It means we're rivals. My eyes went wide. Does that make you my nemesis? Peter, at 5, seemed conflicted, shaking his head, then nodding. I was even more confused. So are we enemies or not? Our grandpas are enemies, but we aren't. He thought for a while before coming up with that. Honestly, he was too cute to be an enemy. If we're not enemies, we're friends. Then you're my friend. I was so excited, I kissed him on the cheek. The teacher said if you like someone, you should kiss them. Peter turned beet red, stuttering something about not doing that. I was puzzled. Doesn't liking someone mean kissing them? Unfortunately, before we could talk more, our grandpa's people found us and we had to leave quietly. Later on, even though our grands stayed at odds, Peter and I became good friends. He seriously told me that real friends don't kiss each other randomly. Things stayed peaceful until high school. People thought we were rivals, always competing, but we helped each other in secret. Even our granddads mellowed with age, not as tense as before. Sometimes they even chatted peacefully, though they still argued too. Then I overheard Peter talking to his buddy. Knowing our family's feud, his friend spoke openly. Peter, how long will you keep competing with the Z family girl? Grade school, middle school, now high school. You gonna do this your whole life? Even though we were friends, we were also rivals. After all these years, don't you get tired of it? It's normal to think like Peter's friend did. Endless competition wears anyone out. Yeah, tired. But Peter's answer pushed me into a deep abyss. Turned out he was tired too. Makes sense, publicly rivals, privately helping each other. That kind of relationship must have exhausted him by now. He probably didn't like me at all. Maybe I was the fool all along. Our families had always been enemies, and no amount of effort could change that. Why not crush any delusions before I got hurt later? After that day, I began avoiding Peter. Even though I knew it wasn't his fault at all. But I just didn't want to keep going. You thought I didn't like you? Peter's whole demeanor was dark and heavy. I forced a smile. It's all in the past, let's just leave it. Besides, now, by some twist of fate, I've got his kid. It's not in the past. Peter's tone was still strong and firm. He held my chin, not too forcefully, making me look at him. His eyes were intense as he spoke each word clearly. Linda, I like you. I've always liked you. Since we first met at 5 years old, my feelings for you have grown every year. I know our family's relationship might cause many obstacles, but I'm not afraid. Because every heartbeat tells me I must catch up to you. This is the direction my heart wants, it's destiny. I am tired of liking you without saying it, tired of pretending to be rivals with you every day, and tired of the feud between our families. But at that time, I didn't have the capability to do anything about it. When he finally had the power, she wanted to avoid him. Linda, I like you so much that my whole heart is filled with you. Don't leave me, okay? His tall figure gradually bent down, and Peter enfolded my waist, whispering against my shoulder. For a moment, I didn't know how to react, so I let him hold me. I blinked, feeling dizzy. Peter likes me? And has for so long? In my daze, something dampened my shoulder. With tears streaming down, Peter softly apologized to me. Sorry, I should have confessed sooner. Can you not abandon me? Even if you want me to be a stepdad, I'd agree. Just don't leave me. It was the first time I saw Peter being so cautious. Just when I was about to say something, the tightly closed door suddenly swung open. George was holding my daughter, standing next to David, who was staring wide-eyed at Peter's torn shirt and our posture. Shocked, his voice altered. Linda, this is forced love, huh? I coughed into my hand, hurriedly pushing Peter away to clear my name. George, I am innocent. But doing that only made the torn fabric on Peter's chest more noticeable, and combined with his tear-stained eyes, George became more skeptical. He tilted his body, promptly pulling David out. Don't look, don't look. David, let's go. Even before leaving, he remembered to hand my daughter back to me. Well, this misunderstanding is even harder to clear up now. Peter acted completely unbothered, oddly inching closer to glance at Coco in my arms. There's no denying, the father-daughter bond is unmistakable. Coco chuckled gleefully at the sight of Peter. Can I hold her? He asked so cautiously. Moved, I handed Coco over to him. Watching Peter, I noticed he was quite adept at holding a baby, surprisingly. Doesn't your family have no kids this generation? I hesitated a bit before speaking. George's words about Peter being the only child of his generation weren't false. How then was he handling a baby so well? Looking down at our daughter, Peter's tone was incredibly gentle. Knew you were returning home for the baby's month-old celebration, so I took parenting classes to become a stepdad. Wait, was he serious about this? Suddenly, I was flooded with mixed emotions. The online buzz was non-stop. Peter wasn't leaving my place anymore. The entire internet was curious about who my daughter's real dad was, leaving messages online. They even wanted to see Peter's dad life. So finally, with his permission, I uploaded a few clips online. In the videos, Peter cradled our daughter, gently rocking her while humming a soft tune, radiating strong husband vibes. Our daughter puckered her lips and grinned at him. The internet exploded. Can I kiss her? Just a little peck? No way, I'm her stepdad. The internet was in an uproar. Peter, however, posted an unfortunately timed status on Facebook. Peter, the kid is mine, the person is mine. Been crushing on her for years, pursuing again now. That post sent his Facebook spiraling into chaos. I shot him a bewildered look. He was earnest. I already explained everything between us to George and them. They also felt guilty and promised not to interfere anymore. Linda, I will pursue you again. If you don't want to be with me, I'll respect your choice. You endured a lot having the baby abroad alone, leave the child to me. Peter spoke with such determination, even planning our future. What if I like someone else? Peter froze for a few seconds before regaining his composure. That's fine, I'll win you over again. I couldn't deny it, he was pretty great at taking care of the kid, leaving me with nothing to worry about. I could just stay home, eat, and drink, occasionally posting videos of Peter caring for our child. But after some time, even George couldn't keep quiet anymore and came to me secretly. He then hesitantly started. Linda, Coco is 5 months old now, isn't there something you're considering? Considering what? You know, about you and Peter. I know we were wrong back then. Now that you both have the child, why not be together? They don't fight anymore, instead, they compete for her affection and love, showing Coco off. Now, Peter and I are their top concern, urging us to get together. But I've already talked with Peter. I prefer how things are now. He doesn't pressure me, saying we can be together when I'm ready. George had no choice but to dejectedly consult with John. After George left, Peter emerged from another room holding our daughter. George was pushing you again? He handed our daughter over to me without a word. I cradled our daughter, kissing her cheek and nodded, yeah. I'll speak to George when I have time. He sighed, remembered something, and covertly leaned closer. With shadowed eyes and a low voice, he queried. Linda, want to come to my room tonight? I got something you like. Something I like? I paused from soothing Coco, silently meeting his gaze, and then chuckled knowingly. That evening, I went to Peter's room. The door stayed closed all night. Epilogue: by the 3rd year of marriage with Peter, our daughter was 4 years old. He was on a business trip, and I was handling work alone. Suddenly, my daughter stumbled in, clutching a notebook. Mommy, it's Dad's stuff. Look. She struggled to hold the notebook and in her little voice insisted I take a look. Seeing that unfamiliar notebook, I was curious. I'd never seen Peter with a notebook like this before. I smiled, picked up my daughter, and opened the notebook. Peter's familiar handwriting came into view. I froze. It was Peter's diary. The handwriting started off immature, gradually became more sophisticated, and eventually turned into elegant cursive. As I kept reading, I couldn't help but cry. This silly man, he had been writing this all along. Mommy, why are you crying? With confusion on her face, my daughter reached out to wipe my tears. I smiled, silently closing the notebook, because Mommy is very happy. With you, and with Daddy. How about we call Daddy? Okay. My daughter answered in her sweet little voice. Later, I took photos of the notebook and posted them on Facebook. I titled it Mr. Peter's Love Diary.